Nobody warned me that the moment I'd been dreaming about for 9 months would turn into the most devastating day of my life when those words left his mouth. The delivery room was still buzzing with that post-birth energy when my husband first held our daughter. I was exhausted, overwhelmed with joy, and completely unprepared for what came next. He looked down at her tiny face, then up at me with this expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and something darker. That's when he said it. "The baby doesn't look like him." Not in a joking way, not in a sweet new parent way. There was accusation in his voice that made my blood run cold. I tried to laugh it off at first. Newborns don't look like anyone, right? They're these little wrinkled beings who need time to develop their features. But he wasn't having it. He kept staring at her, then at me, like he was trying to solve some puzzle. The nurses were bustling around, taking measurements and doing their checks, completely oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room. The ride home was silent except for our daughter's occasional cries from her car seat. I kept glancing at him, hoping to see that familiar warmth in his eyes, but there was nothing. Just this cold distance that made me feel like I was sitting next to a stranger. When we got home, he barely helped with anything. He'd hold her when I absolutely needed him to, but there was no connection, no bonding. It was like he was handling someone else's baby. The first few weeks were brutal. Not just because of the typical new parent challenges, but because I was dealing with this growing rift between us. He started making comments about her features constantly. Her nose was too narrow, her eyes were the wrong shape, her hair texture was different from what he expected. Every observation felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I found myself defending our daughter's genetics to my own husband, explaining how babies can inherit traits from grandparents and great-grandparents. I pulled out family photos, pointing out similarities between her and various relatives. But nothing I said seemed to matter. He'd already made up his mind about something, and I was terrified to find out what that something was. The breaking point came when our daughter was about 6 weeks old. I woke up in the middle of the night for a feeding and found him standing over her crib with his phone flashlight, studying her face like he was conducting some kind of investigation. The image of him looming over our sleeping baby with that cold, analytical expression will haunt me forever. That's when I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't live with this cloud of suspicion hanging over our family. So I made a decision that would change everything. Without telling him, I ordered a paternity test online. Not because I had any doubt about the results. I knew with absolute certainty that he was her father, but because I needed to prove it to him once and for all. The waiting period for the results was agonizing. He continued with his distant behavior, treating our daughter like she was some kind of science experiment rather than his child. I started documenting everything: his comments, his behavior, the way he avoided bonding with her. I wasn't sure why I was doing it at the time, but something told me I might need evidence of this period later. When the results came back, I felt a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. Vindication because I was right, he was definitely her father with 99.9% certainty. Heartbreak because I realized that even with proof, our relationship might never recover from this. I planned how I would present the results to him, imagining his shock and hopefully his apology. But life had other plans for me. Update 1. I never got the chance to show him those test results because of what happened next. 3 days after I received the paternity test confirmation, I discovered something that turned my entire world upside down. While doing laundry, I found a crumpled piece of paper in his jeans pocket. It was a printout of an email exchange between him and someone I didn't recognize. The emails were devastating. He hadn't been questioning the baby's paternity because of her looks. He'd been questioning it because he'd been having an affair for the past 1.5 years. The woman he was involved with had been pressuring him to leave me, especially after she found out I was pregnant. She'd been feeding him doubts about the baby's legitimacy as a way to make him feel less guilty about abandoning his family. Reading those emails felt like being hit by a truck. The timeline made everything click into place. His increased work hours, the secretive phone calls, the emotional distance that had started long before the baby was born. I'd attributed it all to pregnancy stress and work pressure, but it was so much worse than that. The worst part was realizing that his behavior in the delivery room wasn't about genuine concern or confusion. It was calculated. He was looking for any excuse to justify walking away from his responsibilities. His affair partner had convinced him that if he could prove the baby wasn't his, he could leave with a clear conscience and start fresh with her. I spent the entire day reading and rereading those emails, trying to process the magnitude of his betrayal. There were discussions about their future together, plans for him to file for divorce, and even conversations about how they would handle things if I became difficult about custody arrangements. They'd been planning my family's destruction for months while I was growing his child inside my body. That night, when he came home from work, I confronted him with everything. I showed him the emails, the paternity test results, and told him exactly what I thought of his cowardly behavior. His response was even worse than I expected. He didn't deny anything. Instead, he tried to justify it by saying he'd fallen out of love with me during the pregnancy and that the affair had just confirmed what he already knew about our marriage. He claimed that seeing the baby had made him realize he couldn't pretend to be happy in our family anymore. He said he'd been trying to find a reason to leave that wouldn't make him look like the bad guy, and that's why he'd been questioning the paternity. The casual way he admitted to manipulating the situation made me realize I was looking at a complete stranger. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, family phone calls, and trying to figure out how to be a single mother while processing the end of my marriage. He moved out immediately, claiming he needed space to think, but I knew he was just moving in with her. The man who should have been helping me navigate those precious early weeks with our daughter was instead starting a new life with someone else. The hardest part was explaining to my family what had happened. They'd all been so excited about the baby, and now I had to tell them that her father had essentially abandoned her based on lies and manipulation. My parents were furious, my siblings were heartbroken, and everyone kept asking what they could do to help. But there was nothing anyone could do to fix the fundamental betrayal of trust that had occurred. Update 2. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, they did. About 2 months after he moved out, I got a call that changed everything again. It was from a woman I'd never heard of before, but she knew everything about my situation. She introduced herself as his affair partner's sister, and she had information I needed to hear. Apparently, his girlfriend had been lying to him just as much as he'd been lying to me. She'd been telling him that she couldn't have children due to a medical condition, which was one of the reasons he felt comfortable planning a future with her. But her sister revealed that not only could she have children, she was actually pregnant with someone else's baby and had been throughout their entire affair. The woman had been using my husband as a backup plan while she figured out her situation with her actual baby's father. She'd been feeding him lies about my pregnancy and our marriage because she needed him emotionally and financially stable while she dealt with her own complicated relationship. When she found out that her real boyfriend was willing to commit to her and their child, she was planning to dump my husband anyway. His affair partner's sister felt guilty about staying silent and decided to reach out to me because she thought I deserved to know the truth. She also mentioned that her sister had been bragging about how easy it was to manipulate my husband and make him believe whatever she wanted him to believe. Apparently, she'd been laughing about how gullible he was and how she'd managed to destroy his marriage without any real commitment on her part. I felt a strange mix of emotions hearing this news. Part of me felt vindicated that the woman who'd helped destroy my family was getting her comeuppance. But mostly, I felt sad for how easily my husband had been manipulated and how little respect he'd had for our marriage that he'd thrown it all away for someone who was using him. I debated whether to tell him what I'd learned. On one hand, he deserved to know that he'd been played just as badly as I had. On the other hand, I wasn't sure I wanted to be the one to deliver that news, and I wasn't sure it would change anything between us anyway. The damage to our relationship was done, regardless of his girlfriend's motivations. I decided to focus on my daughter and myself instead of getting involved in his drama. I started building a support network of other single mothers, joined some parenting groups, and began the process of creating a stable life for just the two of us. It was scary and overwhelming, but also liberating in a way I hadn't expected. The legal proceedings were moving forward, and I was learning to navigate everything from child support calculations to custody arrangements. He was asking for visitation rights, but I was hesitant given how he'd treated our daughter in her first weeks of life. My lawyer advised me to document everything and let the courts decide what was in her best interest. During this time, I started noticing changes in myself that I hadn't expected. I was becoming more confident, more decisive, and more protective of my daughter than I'd ever imagined possible. The experience of being betrayed so completely had broken something in me, but it had also revealed a strength I didn't know I had. Update 3. The final twist in this whole mess came when my daughter was about 4 months old. I was at the pediatrician's office for a routine checkup when the doctor made a casual comment that stopped me cold. She mentioned that our daughter's unusual eye color was interesting and asked if anyone in our family had heterochromia, a condition where someone has two different colored eyes. I stared at my daughter more closely than I had in weeks. I'd been so focused on the drama with my husband and the stress of single parenthood that I hadn't really noticed how much her eyes had changed as she'd grown. One was definitely brown like mine, but the other had flecks of green and gold that made it look almost hazel in certain light. The doctor explained that heterochromia usually runs in families and asked about our genetic history. That's when it hit me like a lightning bolt. My maternal grandfather had heterochromia. I'd grown up seeing it in old family photos, but he died when I was very young, so I'd never really thought about it as a genetic trait that could be passed down. I rushed home and dug through my family photo albums until I found the pictures I was looking for. There he was, my grandfather, with the same distinctive eye pattern that my daughter was developing. I called my mother immediately, and she confirmed what I was seeing. She said it had always been one of his most striking features, and that several people in his generation had variations of it. The irony was overwhelming. My husband had been so convinced that our daughter didn't look like him that he'd used it as an excuse to destroy our family. But the feature that had made him most suspicious was actually a clear genetic marker from my side of the family. If he'd bothered to ask about our family history instead of jumping to conclusions and having an affair, he would have known that our daughter's unique appearance was perfectly explained by genetics. I found myself laughing and crying at the same time as I held my daughter and looked at her beautiful, unusual eyes. She was so clearly mine, so clearly part of our family's genetic legacy, and she was perfect exactly as she was. The feature that had caused so much drama was actually a gift from her great-grandfather, a connection to family history that made her even more special. Final update. I never told my ex-husband about the discovery regarding our daughter's eyes. By the time I figured it out, his affair had already imploded exactly as his girlfriend's sister had predicted, and he was trying to reconcile with me. But I'd moved far beyond the point where explanations or apologies could fix what had been broken. When he came crawling back, claiming he'd made a terrible mistake and begging for another chance, I felt nothing but pity for him. He'd thrown away his family based on lies, manipulation, and his own moral weakness. Even if our daughter had somehow not been his biological child, the way he'd handled the situation was unforgivable. A real partner would have communicated their concerns, sought answers together, and supported each other through any difficulties. Instead, he'd chosen the path of deception, betrayal, and abandonment. He'd been willing to walk away from a helpless infant because it was convenient for his affair. That wasn't the kind of person I wanted as a partner, and it definitely wasn't the kind of father I wanted for my daughter. The custody arrangements were finalized with him getting supervised visitation every other weekend. I insisted on supervision because of his initial rejection of our daughter and his history of making impulsive, selfish decisions. The court agreed that his behavior in the first months of her life raised concerns about his commitment to her well-being. Watching him during those supervised visits was both heartbreaking and validating. He clearly didn't know how to connect with our daughter, and she seemed to sense his uncertainty. She was much more comfortable with my parents, my siblings, and even the daycare workers than she was with her own father. The bond that should have formed in those crucial early weeks had been damaged, possibly beyond repair. I threw myself into creating the best possible life for my daughter and myself. I joined a single mother's support group that became like a second family to me. I went back to school part-time to improve my career prospects. I learned to manage finances, home repairs, and all the other responsibilities that I'd previously shared with a partner. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. The experience had taught me that I was stronger and more capable than I'd ever believed. I'd survived betrayal, heartbreak, and the complete upheaval of my life plans, and I'd come out the other side as a better, more confident person. My daughter is now a toddler with the most amazing personality and those incredible eyes that tell the story of our family's genetic heritage. She's smart, funny, and absolutely fearless, qualities I hope she inherited from the strength I discovered during our most difficult time. When she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her about her great-grandfather and the beautiful eyes they share. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything turned out, and the answer is complicated. I regret the pain and betrayal, and I regret that my daughter will grow up in a broken home. But I don't regret discovering who my ex-husband really was before wasting more years of my life with someone who was capable of such cruelty and selfishness. The experience taught me that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best discoveries about ourselves. I learned that I could handle anything life threw at me, that I was capable of protecting my child and building a good life for both of us, and that I deserved better than someone who would abandon his family based on lies and manipulation. My daughter will grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally, that she's perfect exactly as she is, and that her unique features are gifts from the family members who came before her. She'll never have to question whether she's wanted or whether she belongs, because I'll make sure she knows every single day that she's the best thing that ever happened to me. As for my ex-husband, I hear through mutual friends that he's struggled with relationships since our divorce. Apparently, once people in our social circle learned the truth about why our marriage ended, he developed a reputation as someone who couldn't be trusted. His professional relationships were also affected, since many of his colleagues had met me and our daughter and were disgusted by his behavior. I don't take any pleasure in his struggles, but I also don't feel sorry for him. Actions have consequences, and he's living with the results of his choices. I hope he learns from this experience and becomes a better person, not just for his own sake but for our daughter's sake. She deserves to have a father who's capable of love, commitment, and basic human decency. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the moment in the delivery room when he first questioned our daughter's paternity was actually a gift, even though it felt like a nightmare at the time. It revealed his true character before I could waste more years of my life with someone who was fundamentally selfish and dishonest. Now, when I look at my daughter's beautiful, unique eyes, I don't see the feature that caused so much pain and drama. I see the legacy of my grandfather, the strength of my family's genetic heritage, and the resilience that she and I have both inherited. Those eyes are a reminder that we're part of something bigger than the small, petty concerns of people who are too weak to handle the responsibilities of love and family. We're building a life filled with authentic relationships, genuine love, and the kind of stability that comes from knowing who you can trust and who you can't. My daughter will grow up understanding that real love doesn't come with conditions or require you to prove your worth. She'll know that she's valued for who she is, not for how convenient she is for someone else's plans. That's the gift that came out of all this pain, the knowledge that we're both stronger than we knew, and that we deserve people in our lives who choose us every day, not just when it's easy or beneficial for them. The man who walked away from us in our moment of greatest need wasn't worthy of what we had to offer anyway.